And we are back on the Zero Hour. Joining us now, a good friend of ours, Ryan Grimm, Washington Bureau Chief for the Huffington Post, and an MSNBC contributor. It's hard to say that fast, MSNBC contributor. I think I got the hang of it. Also, author of the book, This Is Your Country on Drugs. Hey, Ryan, thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me back.
Hey, listen, I hear you're working on an interesting news story, and rather than try to summarize it, I could, and I might even be close. Tell us what you got coming out.
Sure. So it's a look at what do the bipartisan grand bargain seeking groups here in Washington do in a town that now seems unable to strike even little tiny bargains. So forget about the idea of the grand bargain where you would you'd trade cuts to Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid in exchange for maybe some cuts to the Pentagon and some tax hikes here and there. That's roughly kind of what the outline of a quote unquote grand bargain. But what do you do when Congress can't function? And so what I've been gathering and what I'll be reporting for this story that you're talking about is that these bipartisan corporate centrist groups see this as kind of an existential threat to their ability to continue moving forward. So they're in the beginning stages of figuring out what they need to get to do to move forward. And in other words, fixing the system so that it can pass legislation again is kind of a prerequisite for them to be able to enact their agenda. Now, I know a lot of folks might see that as kind of the only good news to come out of Washington in a long time. But I think this has a lot of implications for governing over the next couple decades and more.
Well, it's such an interesting story, Ryan. It's so close to our hearts because here on the show, because it goes in so many different potential directions. I mean, one of them is, look, we're delighted that there was no grand bargain. The cynical two parties that sell out of the public interest, frankly, in my view. But so one strategy is it looks like they can't even do petite bargains now, right, because things are so like grand mal and petite mal, but because things are so paralyzed. So on the one hand, yes, I mean everybody stands up and salutes the Sam Waterston lines about we need government that can come together and do something, and where parties can come together and do something. And I suppose that's certainly true. We need to be able to pass budgets and do that sort of thing. But it would be a Pyrrhic victory if the end result was some sort of midway bargain. So how does that look? Is there any possibility of breaking the logjam for good or for evil right now?
None of them are optimistic at all. And believe it or not, the more that I'm talking to folks, and these are what you'd call the VSPs, the very serious people here in Washington. A lot of people think that if there was another financial crisis, and it's probably not an if, it's a when, that the system wouldn't be able to respond the way that it did in 2008. And maybe some people would say, well, that's maybe a good thing too, because a lot of people didn't like the response. But the idea that it couldn't formulate any response, I think ought to be a scary one. The idea that it couldn't formulate a bailout of the top 0.1%, that might be a good thing. The idea that it can't do anything gets a little bit weird, and people are privately starting to kick around, believe it or not, the idea of a constitutional convention more than you've ever heard in a serious way before. Nobody is really willing to say it out loud yet, but the structural issues confronting the ability of the elites to kind of get anything through has people finally saying this system might actually be broken, because for the longest time it was broken when it wanted to be broken. And and then when it needed $700 billion for Wall Street, they managed to fix it. there's real concern now that it might not be fake broken, but really broken.
Well, this is a fascinating story. We're talking with Ryan Grimm of the Huffington Post. And when you say the VSPs are various serious people, you're talking about real movers and shakers in Washington,
right?
Power circles. And so we're talking about people who can have enormous influence. Now, to what do they attribute this paralysis? You know, you get this sort of false equivalency where people say, well, because the Democrats and Republicans won't get together. But when you talk to them one-on-one, are they any more specific than that? Do they understand what the problem is or feel they do?
There are different theories, and Norm Ornstein was at one of the meetings that I've reported about, which included Fix the Debt, which you and your listeners, I'm sure, know well. It included the representative of Sean Parker, who's the guy who made money pirating music, and then on Facebook, and has recently expressed a lot of interest in politics and kind of doing it in one of those kind of bipartisan ways. So he had a representative there, the Bipartisan Policy Center, the big corporate group that tussles with Elizabeth Warren and people like that. They were there, and one of the people that they invited in to talk was Norm Ornstein. And Norm he's an AEI scholar. He's very critical of their approach, of their bipartisan approach, and he's critical of the Republicans. He thinks that that you have to blame Republicans for this, that they have consciously chosen gridlock as a strategy, and the result is the broken system that we get. Now they also had Jonathan Rauch come in, who's a very well respected scholar and kind of practitioner here in Washington, who's working out some other ideas about what might be causing the dysfunction, and I don't want to get too ahead of where he's going, because I know he's going to be doing some writing on this in the future. But one of the things he's looking at almost goes back to the Federalist Papers and Hamilton's kind of fear of too much democracy leading to too much factionalism. And so I think you might see some elites start to coalesce around an idea that you need to restrict democracy in some ways.
Well, I want to take a quick break, and when we get back, I want to explore that a little more. But before we do, I just for the dramatis personae for our audience, Sean Parker, I believe, is the one who was characterized in the Facebook movie The Social Network as saying $1 million isn't cool, $1 billion is cool. That's Sean Parker, right?
That's the one.
And Norm Ornstein, I think of him as, he started out as a Republican, I believe, but I think of him as being a hero in this story, as being he reminds me of Keith Richards in the Gimme Shelter movie. While Mick was saying, oh, people stop fighting, Keith was saying, no, it's those guys over there causing the trouble, pointing at the Hells Angels. Norm Ornstein has been pointing at the Republicans and saying, it's those guys. Right. So he's been kind of a hero. And when we get back, this notion of restricting democracy sounds scary. I want to talk to you a little bit more about that. Ryan Grimm of the Huffington Post. We will be right back with Ryan after this break. And we are back on the Zero Hour talking with Ryan Grimm of the Huffington Post, Washington Bureau Chief of the Huffington Post, about his upcoming article on the very serious people, the bipartisan power brokers of Washington, and their fear that democracy may be broken, what they plan to do about it. So, Ryan, before we went to break, you were saying that some of them were looking at possibilities, perhaps from the scholar Jonathan Rauch or someone else, of perhaps restricting democracy, feeling that democracy has gone too far. What do they mean by that, and what might they be looking at?
Right, and I don't think that that's necessarily how Rauch would characterize it, or even what he's going for. But the basic idea we're talking about, you could start with the House of Representatives, for instance. The idea that it has elections every 2 years on a set date leads to very predictable consequences, that people are constantly campaigning and fundraising. and pandering to whatever primary base they need, and so that makes governing very difficult. The way that they do it in some countries is you have a more parliamentary system where the two parties put forward their programs. If the voters pick one or the other, and then that party gets to actually implement what it ran on. And then if people like the implementation of it, they reelect them. And if they don't, an election is called, and the other party gets a chance to try. We don't do that. We theoretically, the parties put forward differing ideas, and then voters pick between them. But the parties can't actually then implement them. So it would be quite easy, I guess, to say that there actually isn't really much of a democracy now. If by democracy, you mean that the people can, freely form their wills, act on their wills, and then the will gets implemented. We don't go from point A to C there.
Right. So they haven't gotten to the level of specifics, but when I think of it sounds like, but when I think of the European system, I think more democracy rather than less,
right.
Because you don't have a two-party hegemony. You don't have, you could run. Somebody could vote for Working Families Party or Green Party or the rent is too damn high party or whatever it might be, and then the Democrats or whomever might need to form, a coalition among these groups in order to get a governing majority. And that way, people with ideas that are not represented by the very serious people can become a part of the discussion. Is that being looked at all, a more parliamentary system in that form?
I think that as people are talking about the depth of the failure of the current system, but everybody is familiar with the alternatives, and so that's something that people are kicking around. Like I said, nobody would really be willing to say that publicly yet. It sounds like you're unpatriotic and condemning the framers to obscurity, and and nobody wants to be called European in American politics. That's that's the end of it. But on the other hand, that is the alternative that is out there, and I think it actually is useful for people to start thinking about these things in case there is some type of future crisis that does shift the public's thinking about whether or not the current system is functioning, or whether we need major changes to it.
Well, I want to ask you, because I assume you've been going out and talking to a lot of these folks about their thinking, and aren't any of them thinking along the lines of the Norm Ornstein, Keith Richards school, which says that rather than a fundamental change I'd like to see us move to a parliamentary system myself, but aren't any of them thinking, well, rather than a constitutional rewrite, why don't we just stop the political Hell's Angels, the Republicans with the pool cues over there, from beating up our democratic process? Why don't we just name them and shame them? We're the very serious people. Or do they feel they've tried it and it's backfired?
So there are a couple answers to that. One is that the grand bargain folks, take the fix the debt people, they don't actually believe that Democrats are going to fix the debt on their own. So take it from their perspective. They think that if, let's say, they said the reason that this system is broken is these Republican obstructionists, therefore we need to beat them back, and therefore we need to help Democrats retake the levers of power here. They don't think that the next step after that would be deficit cutting and debt reduction. Now, you and I actually might be a little more pessimistic and think that they're wrong, and Democrats would do that because they have, there's a huge faction within the party that would love to see that happen.
Right.
Partly because of the money that is thrown around town by groups such as Fix the Debt, but that's their belief, that they think you need compromise between the two parties because neither wants to do it on their own. They don't think that the Republicans would do it either. they think if Republicans took full control, that they would just slash taxes across the board, and the deficit would shoot up again. And there's good reason to believe that is what would happen. So for groups that have that type of agenda, the Norm Ornstein fix doesn't actually get them what they need, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. But what it says to me is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that this is not motivated by any patriotic concern for keeping the wheels of government moving effectively. It's an economic play. They want to see deficit reduction. And the best instrument for doing that is a two-party system over which they exert enormous control, because that's a balancing mechanism where they can distribute the blame for these unpopular policies between two parties, make it look like it was a compromise between the two. They get what they want, and the American people get screwed. I mean, am I being unfair here?
No, I think that's a pretty fair way of putting it. They would say that they're saving the American people, of course, rather than screwing them. But yes, that's basically the model that they've had in mind for how these things get accomplished over the last couple of decades, which is what's so fascinating about today's climate, where that doesn't really exist. So if that means to that end is not there anymore, so then how do you get to the same end? And they certainly have not figured that out yet. That's what they're thinking through at the moment.
Well, you mentioned so they're thinking it through, which, forgive me for trembling with fear a little bit when I hear that these people are thinking anything through. Fix the Debt, for folks who don't know, is the group that was, these are all the same characters in different form. It's like the Mission Impossible guys. They just show up in different uniforms, but it's the Fix the Debt people are closely connected to the various Pete Peterson groups, but that's the group of CEOs that wants the American government to budget responsibly, quote unquote, and includes Lloyd Blankfein and a bunch of other people, Jamie Dimon from J.P. Morgan Chase, and a bunch of David, I guess the defense contractors and so on. So you got all these guys, and then now you've got a new contingent in there. This part does interest me, of Sean Parker and, as I think I said in a note to you, cutting $1 million from Social Security, not cool. $1 billion from Social Security, that's cool. So, how does a Sean Parker fit into this? What kind is he coming in with that kind of techno hipster? This is going to be government 2.0 attitude, or is he just like another kind of falling in line behind the Honeywell CEO and the bank CEO? So what's his play in all of this?
My sense is that he's much more of the techno, we're going to be government 2.0, and bringing that Silicon Valley approach that says that, nobody had figured out how to run anything until they came around, to glorify failure and innovation, and et cetera. So that, I think that's kind of his approach, and he's following in the footsteps of, Joe Green, Mark Zuckerberg's roommate, who runs the kind of pro-immigration reform group, which was very bipartisan, if not strongly Republican, because in an effort to implement that same model. That the parties haven't figured it out, so these tech folks are going to come in and figure it out. So I think Parker is kind of feeling his way in Washington, and I wouldn't, and he was not at these meetings personally. I was a representative of his. So I don't think that he got into this because he wants to get behind group companies like Honeywell or Goldman Sachs. There's really no point in that. Why bother? It feels more like kind of an ego play. That he feels like much of Silicon Valley feels that they have answers and they have solutions to problems facing the world, and so he's exploring different ways to implement those.
Well, have you? I'm just curious. Have you asked him for an interview?
Not yet.
All right.
I hope to have by the time. I hope to have interviewed him by the time that the story comes out, though.
So, just a couple final questions for you. First of all, when do you think we'll be able to read this story? Because I'm fascinated by it.
It should be up as your show goes live.
Good. Okay. For folks who don't know, we are pre-taping, so that would be this weekend. I certainly hope so. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. And I guess my last question for you, Ryan Grimm, is so what do you see coming? I mean, we've had all these no labels and all these other efforts to say, let's come together as one people and work against our own best interests and let us lead you in doing that. We've had all these efforts to do that, deficit commission, Simpson Bowles, and all that. Where do you see this? Do you see any chance of these guys getting anywhere? What do you see unfolding in the next 6 to 12 months?
I mean, there isn't much that they can do over the next 6 to 12 months. There's a CR, the continuing budget resolution that needs to be passed. There are just a handful of moments that they have to try to exert a little bit of influence, but there's no appetite among Democrats at the moment for this kind of a thing. We're heading into a presidential year, which, as we were talking about earlier, that slows down the act of governing. These are extremely well-funded groups, but they're having to rethink how they try to wield influence, without which it becomes harder for them to go back to their original donors and say, hey, we need to, we're doing good work here that needs to continue. So it's an interesting time for anybody in Washington who depends on Congress being able to get something done.
Yeah, it's a fascinating issue and a fascinating topic to write about, filled with resonances as to their current predicament. Forgive me for saying this, but cue the Schadenfreude music. But but it does resonate with a lot of problems for the country as a whole. So I hope you'll stay on this story. I hope you'll come back and talk to us about it. We've been talking with Brian. We've been talking with Brian Grimm, Washington bureau chief for the Huffington Post, and thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
We will be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.